Welcome back. We're unpacking the Alberta budget released just weeks away, I suppose, or just a couple months away from the Alberta election provincially. And joining me again is Kris Sims, Alberta Director with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Kris, just before we went to break, we were giving our general thoughts on this budget. So it's very interesting. You mentioned one thing that caught my attention, because as a Ontarian, we don't have this. What is a Heritage Savings Trust? What is this? Why was it created, and what do you hope it'll do?
Yes, so it's basically a massive savings account for the entire province that we are supposed to put some of our revenues and royalties from oil and gas or natural resources into. It was created many decades ago, and the purpose of it originally was to save a lot of money for the future. Now, if we were all to sit back and close our eyes and dream, if we all did this right now here in Alberta, many years from now, don't quite know when, we would have enough money in that savings account to live off of it and not have an income tax.
Wow.
Provincially. Yeah. So to look at other places where this has happened, Alaska, for example, they've had a similar sort of natural resource savings fund there for years. And they send out checks, I think of a few $100s every quarter to all of their citizens. Of, hey, here's some money. Congratulations, you live in a revenue rich province, and thank you so much for working so hard. In Norway, it is just an eye-watering amount of money. And again, it's from oil and gas. A lot of people think of the Nordic countries as somehow these granola, solar panel places, but a lot of Norway's wealth is from oil and gas, and they've got billions and billions, like an eye-watering amount of money in there in a savings account. So while we see here in Canada more than $1 trillion in debt, we drive around our debt clock and things. They're in the black in Norway. And so the thinking is if we keep putting a portion of our savings into this trust fund down the road, we might be able to eliminate income tax. So what they did is they put money in it every year, hopefully, and then they are usually not supposed to, but lately they had been taking some of the interest and dividends out of it, not the seed money.
Right.
That stays the same. But they've been taking money out of it to help, cover deficits and emergencies and some overspending in previous governments. So what we're wanting is them to not do that anymore. Leave it where it is.
Okay, so how much is in there? Do you know offhand?
I think it's around $13 billion, if I'm correct.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
It's a decent chunk of change. Yeah. And so that could be off a little bit either way, but it's around that amount of money.
Okay.
But the thing is that if they keep taking the revenue out of it, like not the seed money, but the money that they make off of it out, it won't generate, right? They have to just leave it. But that's tough to do when you're tied to the roller coaster and you have all these huge spending demands, which is why we're so happy with these rules of fiscal restraint, of balanced budget legislation, pay down the debt as a priority, save the rest of the money in heritage savings.
Okay, so let's talk about those. Let's unpack that because, I've never heard of a balance the budget legislation in my life. So this is very novel for me as a Canadian girl from Ontario. So what is that? What are they proposing here in Alberta?
Great question. So I'll give you an example first from British Columbia. So the NDP has now balled up this legislation and thrown it out the window, the NDP government in British Columbia, but they were abiding by it for several years while it was out there. Credit where it's due. What balanced budget legislation did in British Columbia was something like this. Okay, outside of, God forbid, a massive disaster, you must present a balanced budget. If you were a minister and your department comes back in deficit, you take a pay cut of 10% as a minister, and so do all of your top bureaucrats. So that gets pretty itchy pretty fast for politicians, and they don't like doing that. So for a long time, British Columbia was delivering balanced budgets because it was balanced budget legislation law. Now they've used the fog of COVID to kind of sweep that under the rug and say, oh, it was an emergency and it's kind of still happening. And they've kind of let themselves off the hook there. Here in Alberta, we were calling for a similar thing. We were saying, hey, you have to put through balanced budget legislation because number one, who knows how you're going to be spending in the future if you're the same government? And two, who knows how the next government's going to want to spend our money? So let's have these restraints.
And if this legislation is passed, I mean, who wants to be the premier leading a government saying, oh, we're going to repeal the balanced budget legislation? So once it's passed, it's kind of there. Right.
You might be chasing them around in a fibber costume or with big signs or something, right? Because they don't want to see that. Now, we don't yet have the details in the legislation. We're expecting it to be tabled as law this spring, like soon.
Before
So
the
I
election.
don't quite know yet. Yes, we don't quite know yet if there's going to be, pay penalties for ministers or bureaucrats or how that's going to break down. But they have committed to balanced budget legislation.
Okay, lots to unpack here. And we haven't even gotten to health and education, but we are going to do that in the upcoming segments. Please stick around.